There is a place on this planet so deep that the sunlight gives up long before it arrives. Far out in the western Pacific, southwest of a small green island called Guam, the floor of the ocean opens downward into a long, slender crescent of dark, a valley in the seabed deeper than any other on Earth, where the water keeps going down past the reach of every ray of light, past the last faint blue of the upper sea, into a cold and weightless black that has never once been touched by morning. Sink in your imagination toward it from a great and painless height, down through the warm, bright surface, down through the slow fading of the colours, into a stillness so complete that a single grain of dust falling from far above is the only thing that moves. There is a snailfish there with skin like clouded glass, and a swarm of pale shrimp-like creatures grazing a floor that has not felt a current in 1,000 years, and a single living cell as wide as your hand. And far overhead, so far that it might as well be a rumour, the ocean has a surface, and a sky, and a sun. This is the Mariana Trench. And what is it like, at the very bottom of the world? You do not need to hold any of this. There is nothing here to learn by heart, nothing to gather up and carry into tomorrow. Let the facts move through you the way the deep water moves, slowly, without effort, touching you for a moment and then easing on past. Some of these wonders will follow you down into sleep, and some will dissolve before the morning, and both of those are exactly right. This is the strange comfort of the deepest places. They have been there, dark and undisturbed, for longer than there have been eyes to look for them, and they will go on being there whether you remember a word of this or not. So let the mind grow loose and heavy. Let the body sink a little further into wherever it is resting. The deep is in no hurry tonight, and neither are you. Begin with the simplest astonishment, the one number that holds all the others inside it. At its lowest point, the Mariana Trench reaches down about 10,935 metres, very nearly 11 kilometres straight down from the surface of the sea. That is a measurement difficult for the mind to truly stand inside, because nothing in ordinary life is that far in any direction, let alone downward through cold, black water. If you could somehow drain the ocean and stand at the rim and look down, you would be staring into a shadow with no visible floor at all, a darkness that swallows the eye long before it reaches the bottom. To picture it another way, a passenger jet cruises at about 10 kilometres above the ground. The trench drops nearly that same distance below the waves, so that the deepest seafloor lies as far beneath the surface as an airliner flies above the fields. Modern instruments have measured that depth to within a few metres, bouncing sound off the floor and timing its long return, and the most careful recent figures all settle close to that staggering value. Refined again and again over the years, each new survey confirming just how far down the bottom truly lies. The deepest part of the deepest sea on the only ocean world anyone has ever found. And it has been waiting down there, patient and unlit, through the entire span of human history and very long before. A stillness that was already old when the first stories were told around the first fires. To give that depth a shape the mind can hold, set the tallest mountain on Earth inside it. Mount Everest rises about 8,849 metres above the level of the sea, the highest that solid ground has ever climbed into the sky, a peak so high that climbers must carry their own air. And yet, if you could lift that entire mountain by its roots and lower it gently into the bottom of the Mariana Trench, its summit, the very top, the place where the flags and the thin cold wind are, would still vanish beneath more than 2 kilometres of water. The greatest height our planet has to offer, drowned, with room to spare above it. A climber standing on that submerged summit would still have to rise the height of several tall mountains stacked together just to break the surface and feel the sun. The whole towering mass of rock and snow that takes the hardiest mountaineers weeks of effort to ascend would, down here, be merely the lower portion of the drop, its peak still more than 2 kilometres beneath the waves, the daylight unimaginably far overhead. The deepest point goes down farther than the highest point goes up. There is something quietly steadying in that, in knowing the world keeps its largest spaces not in its mountains but in its hidden, unhurried dark, that the planet's most extreme reach is not a peak scoured by wind, but a quiet hollow no wind has ever found. The deepest hollow within that trench has a name of its own, soft and grand at once, the Challenger Deep. It lies near the southern end of the Long Crescent, a narrow slot in an already impossibly deep valley, the single lowest patch of seafloor yet found anywhere on the planet. It sits a few hundred kilometers southwest of the island of Guam, in the warm western Pacific, beneath waters that belong to a scattering of small island nations, so that the lowest point on Earth lies, oddly enough, not in some remote and trackless ocean, but within reach of palm trees and quiet harbours. The name is not modern. It comes from a wooden sailing ship of the 1870s, the HMS Challenger, whose crew first lowered a weighted rope into these waters and felt it fall and keep falling, far longer than any sounding line had ever fallen before. They had no idea in that moment what they had found. They only knew the rope would not stop, and that beneath their small ship lay something far deeper than the world had imagined the sea could be. That expedition spent more than 3 years circling the globe, lowering its lines again and again into waters no one had ever measured, and of all the soundings it took, this one stood apart, the single deepest reading of the entire voyage, a hollow in the floor of the Pacific that would keep its title as the lowest place on Earth for every year since. The ship is long gone, but its name still rests there in the dark, far beneath the waves. Picture those sailors on the deck in 1875 paying out hemp rope hand over hand under a wide Pacific sky. They had no engines to do it, no sonar, no electronics of any kind, only a length of rope with a heavy weight tied to its end, and the willingness to feed it down into the water and wait for the tug that meant it had touched bottom. That day the rope ran out to nearly 8,000 meters before it found the floor, a depth so far beyond anything previously measured that it must have seemed almost unbelievable. With nothing but rope and weight and curiosity, they had located the deepest place on Earth and very nearly measured it true. The figure they recorded that day turned out to sit remarkably close to the depth that modern instruments would confirm well over a century later. A near miss made with hemp and patience instead of sound and satellites. Everything humanity has since learned about the bottom of the world began with that one slow, falling line. A single thread let down into the dark, and the quiet astonishment of feeling it keep going. Now let the scale settle a little. The trench is not a single round pit, but long curving scar in the seabed, shaped like a thin crescent moon laid down on the ocean floor. It runs for roughly 2,500 kilometers from end to end, longer than many countries are wide, and yet it is only about 70 kilometers across at its broadest, a narrow wound in the crust far longer than it is wide. From above, if the water were glass, it would look like a single dark brush stroke drawn across the pale floor of the Pacific, a crescent of shadow thousands of kilometers long, curving gently around the chain of islands that gives it its name. Yet for all its length, it is so narrow and so far down that you could sail directly over its deepest point in a ship and never feel the faintest hint that the floor had just dropped away to 11 kilometers beneath the hull. The walls of the trench slope down so gradually, spread across so many kilometers of width, that to a creature small enough to walk its floor it would not seem like a chasm at all, but like a vast, gently tilting plain stretching away into the dark on every side. It is among the largest landscape features on the planet, and almost no one will ever see it, and it makes no sound at all. A canyon vaster than any on dry land, hidden beneath a surface that looks, from a boat, exactly like any other patch of open sea. The reason such a place exists at all is a story told in unimaginable slowness, the slowest kind of motion there is. The hard outer shell of the Earth is broken into great plates, and out here in the western Pacific one of those plates is sliding beneath another, the vast Pacific plate bending downward and diving under the smaller plate that carries the Mariana Islands, sinking back into the hot interior of the world. Where one plate dips beneath the other, The seafloor is dragged down with it, folded into a trench far deeper than the surrounding ocean. This is the deepest expression on Earth of a process called subduction, the patient recycling of the planet's own crust. The plates move at a pace almost too slow to call motion at all, about as fast as your fingernails grow, a few centimeters a year, and yet across millions of years that imperceptible creep is enough to bend the seafloor into the deepest valley in the world. The trench is not a hole that was dug. It is a place where the floor of the world is very gradually going home, folding downward so slowly that in a whole human lifetime, it sinks no farther than the length of a long afternoon's walk. And the crust that is sinking here is some of the oldest the ocean has. The slab of seafloor diving into the Mariana Trench formed something like 180 million years ago, back when the first dinosaurs walked a world that would be unrecognizable today. Over all that time, the rock has drifted across the Pacific, slowly cooling, growing colder and denser and heavier with every passing age, until at last it has become heavy enough to sink. Old ocean crust is cold ocean crust, and cold crust is dense crust, and dense crust falls. This is part of why the Mariana Trench reaches deeper than any other. The slab plunging into it is among the most ancient seafloor anywhere on the planet, and the older and colder the rock, the more steeply and the more willingly it sinks. Here the diving plate folds down at a notably sharp angle, almost vertically in places, which helps carve the trench so much deeper than the gentler subduction zones found elsewhere in the world. The deepest trench on Earth lies exactly where the oldest, coldest, heaviest seafloor finally surrenders to gravity and slips back beneath the world. The trench is deep because the rock there is ancient and tired and ready to descend. A piece of the planet's skin, older than the birds and the flowers, quietly lying down to rest. Hold for a moment on the pressure of that place, which is perhaps its most famous quality, and one of the gentlest to reframe. At the bottom of the Challenger Deep, the entire weight of nearly 11 kilometers of seawater presses down on every surface, a pressure more than 1,000 times what you feel at the surface of the sea, somewhere around 8 tons bearing on each square inch. The numbers sound violent, but down there the pressure is not a storm or a force that strikes. It is utterly silent, perfectly even, pressing equally from every side at once, a stillness so total that it holds everything in a kind of changeless suspension. The water does not churn, nothing slams. To the soft creatures that live there, this pressure is not felt as a burden at all, because it presses on them from within exactly as hard as it presses from without, leaving them perfectly balanced, perfectly held, like a hand resting weightless in still water. The greatest pressure on the planet is also one of its most motionless places, an immense, even, all-surrounding calm, less like being crushed, and more like being cradled on every side at once. Consider what that pressure does to the things people send down to meet it. When researchers lower their instruments into the trench, they sometimes tie an ordinary white foam cup to the outside of the vessel, the kind that might hold coffee on a cold morning. By the time the cup returns from the bottom, it has been squeezed down to a thimble, every tiny air pocket in the foam crushed flat. The whole cup shrunk to a miniature of itself, perfect in every detail and a fraction of its former size. Nothing was broken, nothing tore. The water simply pressed out all the emptiness the foam had been holding and gave back a smaller, denser, stranger version of the same shape. Crews who make these dives have turned it into a quiet ritual, decorating the cups with ink beforehand and keeping the shrunken results as keepsakes. A full-sized cup of foam returning as a perfect dollhouse version of itself, the writing still legible, only an inch or two tall. Even a whole net full of foam heads, lowered to the deepest floor, comes back shrunk together into a tiny cluster, every one identical and tiny, as if the sea had carefully made miniatures of them all. It is a small souvenir of an enormous truth. Down there, even the spaces inside things quietly close. The trench does not destroy what it takes. It simply squeezes out the hollow places and hands back something smaller and truer. The creatures that truly belong there have no such hollows to lose, and so they feel none of this. It is only the things from our airy upper world, full of trapped emptiness, that the deep gently presses down to a fraction of their size. The cold of the deep is its own kind of constancy. Near the bottom of the trench, the water hovers between about 1 and 4 degrees above freezing, never warm, never quite frozen, holding steady at a chill just shy of ice. Up at the surface, the ocean swings through seasons and storms and the heat of the noon sun, but none of that ever reaches this far down. The deep does not have weather. It does not have summer or winter. It has held the same near-freezing temperature in the same darkness through every warm day and every storm that has ever crossed the sea above it. Strangely, the crushing pressure even warms the water a touch above what it would otherwise be. A faint, paradoxical heat folded into the cold, so that the very bottom of the trench can sit a fraction warmer than the chill layers a little way above it. It is among the most thermally stable places anywhere on the planet, a vast, unchanging coolness that simply does not move. Whole empires have risen and crumbled in the bright world above, ice ages have come and gone, and through every one of them this water has held the same steady chill, neither warming in summer nor freezing in winter, keeping a temperature as constant as anything in all of nature. A thermometer left on that floor for 1,000 years would scarcely twitch. The same near-icy reading, hour after hour, century after century, with nothing to nudge it warmer or colder than it has always been. And it is dark, truly, completely dark, in a way the surface world has no real word for. Sunlight can only push so far into seawater before the ocean drinks it entirely. By a depth of a single kilometre, the last trace of daylight is gone, and the Mariana Trench plunges down nearly 11. Everything below that first kilometre lives in permanent night, a blackness unbroken by dawn or dusk or moon, stretching down through kilometre after kilometre of water that has never seen a single photon of sunlight. It is not the darkness of a closed room, which a lamp could banish. Sunlight fades so fast in water that even the clearest sea goes pitch black within the first few hundred metres of any real depth. The rest of the descent, kilometre after kilometre, happens in a night that no surface brightness could ever reach. It is an ancient, absolute dark, older than eyes, the natural condition of most of the living space on this planet. The lit world you know is only a thin, bright skin stretched over a far deeper, far darker sea, a narrow band of daylight floating atop an ocean that is, almost everywhere, profoundly and permanently black. The ocean does not turn black all at once, though. It fades downward through a series of softening worlds, each named for the quality of its light. Near the top lies the sunlit zone, warm and bright and full of colour, the part of the sea that most people ever meet. Beneath it spreads the twilight zone, where the light thins to a deep dusk blue and the warm colours vanish one by one. Below that comes the midnight zone, where no sunlight reaches at all, and the only glimmers are made by living things. Deeper still lies the abyss, a vast cold plain that covers much of the planet's floor, and deeper than the abyss, in the trenches alone, the hadal zone, the very bottom layer of the sea. Each of these realms is its own world, with its own creatures and its own quality of darkness, stacked one beneath another like the floors of an immense submerged tower. To sink toward the Mariana Trench is to pass slowly down through every one of these realms in turn, from the bright and familiar into the dim, and from the dim into a dark that has no flaw the eye can find, descending through layer after layer of the sea, each one older and stiller and farther from the sun than the last. That deepest layer carries an old and fitting name. Scientists call the trenches the hadal zone, after Hades, the underworld of ancient story, the hidden realm beneath everything, where the living almost never go. It begins around 6,000 metres down and reaches to the very bottom of the sea, and it exists only in the trenches, these rare narrow gashes scattered across the ocean floor. Everything below that mark, the deepest fifth or so of the ocean's full range, belongs to the hadal realm, and the Mariana Trench reaches further into it than anywhere else, carrying the floor down past where almost no other place on Earth can follow. The Mariana Trench holds the deepest hadal water there is, the lowest rung of the lowest realm. Only a tiny handful of these hadal trenches exist anywhere on Earth, narrow and scattered, together making up a vanishingly small sliver of the ocean floor, which makes the deepest of them rarer and more remote than almost any landscape one could name. Because each trench is a deep isolated gash cut off from the others by shallower seas, their hadal creatures live almost like islanders, each trench evolving its own distinct snailfish and amphipods, found nowhere else on Earth. It is a strange and beautiful thing that the people who first mapped these depths reached back to the oldest myths to find a name large enough, that the literal underworld of the planet turned out to be not a place of fire, but a place of cold and silence and slow, unmoving dark, a realm whose only torment, if it has one, is its perfect and unbroken peace. Far down in that dark, against everything one might expect, there is life, and not as a rare lonely accident, but as a quiet and steady presence. The single deepest fish ever seen alive is a small pale snailfish, filmed swimming calmly more than 8,000 meters beneath the surface in a trench near Japan, in the same deep family of waters as the Mariana. The exact depth was a little over 8,300 meters, a record set only a few years ago, deeper than any fish had ever before been caught on camera, and very close to the limit scientists believe any fish can reach at all. It was a young one, almost translucent, ghosting through the black toward a camera, as if the staggering pressure of all that water was simply the ordinary weight of home. To it, there was nothing extreme about the place at all. The discovery surprised even the scientists who made it, who had not expected to find a fish so deep, swimming so unbothered, so far below the level where most fish can survive. It was not enduring the deep. It was simply living there, where it had always lived, in the only world it had ever known. In its own quiet realm, the snailfish is something of a ruler. Near the bottom of its range, it is the largest hunter around, drifting gently down to feed on the swarms of little amphipods, a soft and unhurried master of a soft and unhurried kingdom. To that small, pale traveller, the bottom of the ocean was not the edge of anything, but simply home, ordinary and complete. The snailfish is a marvel of soft engineering, a creature built for a place that would crush almost anything rigid. It has no scales and barely any bone to speak of. Its body is a pale, jelly-like softness, faintly translucent, with the faint pink of its insides showing through skin like wet tissue. Where other fish hold a pocket of gas inside them to keep from sinking, the snailfish has none. A pocket of gas would be flattened instantly down here. Instead, its body is filled with a watery gel that the pressure cannot compress, so the weight of the deep flows straight through it, pressing equally inside and out, leaving the little fish perfectly at ease. Its very bones are soft and only partly hardened, its skull left a little open, every part of it designed to bend rather than break. Bring one up too quickly to the surface, and it cannot survive the change. The easy pressure of the shallow world is as wrong for it as the crushing deep would be for us, and its soft body, made for the weight of the abyss, simply comes undone in the thin water above. It does not fight the pressure. It lets the pressure pass through it, and in that surrender it stays whole, a creature that thrives not by armouring itself against the deep, but by becoming, in a sense, almost the same soft stuff as the water around it. There is a molecule that makes this possible, a tiny chemical secret carried in the bodies of the deepest fish. The immense pressure of the trench would normally crumple the delicate machinery of life, folding proteins out of their proper shapes until they no longer work. But these fish are rich in a small protective compound that braces their proteins from within, helping each one keep its form under a weight that would otherwise distort it. The deeper a fish lives, the more of this molecule its body seems to hold, as though it were stocking up a quiet inner ballast against the growing pressure. A tiny chemical kindness, built into the flesh, that lets a delicate creature stay whole where nothing rigid could. There appears to be a limit to how much of this molecule a body can hold, and that limit may set the very deepest depth at which any fish can live, somewhere around 8,200 meters, a soft floor beneath which the fishes do not go. It is a curious thought, that the deepest trenches reach lower still, into water where no fish can follow, so that the very bottom belongs only to creatures simpler and stranger than fish. Even life has a gentle boundary down here, drawn not by fear, but by chemistry, a quiet line past which the fishes simply do not pass. And below that line, the trench grows quieter and stranger yet, handing the last kilometers over to softer forms of life. Below the realm of fish, where even the snailfish does not venture, the trench is far from empty. The very bottom belongs to swarms of small, pale, shrimp-like creatures called amphipods, drifting and grazing across the deep floor in numbers almost beyond counting. They are scavengers, the tireless cleaners of the abyss, and they gather wherever anything edible settles down from the world above. Lower a baited trap to that lightless floor, and leave it in the dark, and you will haul it back swarming with them, hundreds upon hundreds of these small ghostly grazers, going calmly about their lives at the lowest point on the planet, in a place no light has ever reached. They appear within hours of any morsel reaching the bottom, materializing out of the empty dark in numbers that astonish the scientists who lower the traps, a whole hidden multitude that the still water had given no sign of holding. Some of these deep amphipods grow far larger than their relatives in shallower seas, pale armoured creatures the length of a hand, drifting through the black like slow gentle giants of a miniature world. They were there before anyone came looking. They will be there long after, an ancient thriving multitude tending the deepest floor on Earth in numbers no one will ever count. One of these deep amphipods carries a secret that astonished the scientists who found it. Some of them feed on the wood that sinks down from far above, fragments of sunken trees and plants that drift all the way to the bottom. And to digest that tough plant fibre, their bodies hold a strange tool. Inside their guts, researchers found a lining reinforced with aluminium drawn from the seawater itself, a faint metal armour that protects them as they break down their woody meals. The creature takes ordinary minerals dissolved in the sea and turns them, within its own body, into a kind of natural alloy, a tiny living foundry working away in the cold dark, building protection out of the very water it swims in. A living creature, smaller than a fingertip, quietly building a coat of metal in its own belly at the bottom of the sea. To make a living at all in a place where food arrives so rarely and so slowly, these creatures have become endlessly resourceful, able to eat what almost nothing else can and to wait, if they must, through long stretches of hunger between gifts from above. It is a reminder that life does not simply survive the deep by enduring it. It invents, down there in the dark, solutions no one above had ever imagined, quietly solving problems the surface world never even had to face. Among the strangest residents of the deep floor is a creature that blurs the line between an animal and a speck of mud. Spread across the sediment of the trench live the xenophores, single-celled organisms, just one cell each, and yet some of them grow as wide as a human hand, 10 or 20 centimeters across. They are among the largest single cells known anywhere on Earth, and they thrive in the deepest, darkest, most crushing water there is, gathering grains of sediment around themselves into delicate, branching lacework forms. A single drop of life, swollen to the size of a saucer, sitting calmly on the floor of the deepest place in the world. They are among the most abundant larger life forms on parts of the deep floor, found in great numbers right down into the trenches, gentle and everywhere at once. To grow so large while remaining a single cell is something almost no other life on Earth attempts. Most living things that big are built from billions of cells working together, yet here is one cell alone, the size of a small plate, holding itself whole under the greatest pressure there is. They harm nothing and disturb nothing. They simply sift the soft sediment, slowly, endlessly, doing the unhurried work of a creature with no eyes, no brain, and nowhere it needs to be. A form of life so simple and so old, it seems to belong to an earlier, gentler version of the world. These great cells do a quiet service for everything around them. As they sift the sediment and gather their grains, they create tiny sheltered spaces, little architectures of stillness on an otherwise featureless floor, and other small creatures come to live among them. Where the xenophephories grow thickest, the deep floor holds the most life, a faint scattered community gathered around these soft branching forms, the way a single shrub gives shelter in a wide and empty desert. Small worms and tiny shellfish and other little creatures tuck themselves into the folds and hollows of these living structures, finding food and shelter in the only refuge for miles. Where these great cells gather thickly, the floor can hold far more small creatures than the bare sediment nearby, so that a patch of them becomes a crowded oasis of life in an otherwise empty plain, a single soft body turned in effect into a coral reef of the abyss. One cell, asking for nothing, becomes a kind of haven for its neighbours. Even at the bottom of the world, life finds ways to make room for more of itself, gently, without competition or hurry, building, out of a single soft body, a whole small neighbourhood in the dark. Smaller than all of these and far more numerous are the microbes, and they are the true masters of the deep. The sediment of the Mariana Trench is alive with bacteria and other tiny single-celled life, in numbers no mind can hold, thriving under pressures that would burst most cells like overfilled balloons. Some of them do not merely tolerate the pressure, they require it, and could not live without the very weight that would destroy almost anything from the surface. Scientists call them piezophiles, pressure lovers, and they are perfectly, serenely at home in a place that to us seems impossibly harsh. Some of them live not only in the water and the mud, but deep within the rock beneath the seafloor itself, eking out unimaginably slow lives in the pores of the stone, dividing perhaps once in centuries. Taken all together, the unseen microbes living beneath the world's seafloors are thought to make up a quietly staggering share of all the living matter on the planet, a vast hidden biosphere, mostly in the dark, mostly in the deep. To these countless small lives, the bottom of the trench is not an extreme at all. It is simply the world, ordinary and complete, exactly as it should be, and they outnumber, by far, every larger creature that has ever drawn a breath in the sun. The food that sustains all of this drifts down, impossibly slowly, from the sunlit world far above. Throughout the bright upper ocean, tiny living things are constantly dying, and their remains, flecks of dead plankton, scraps of tissue, the soft debris of a whole living sea, sink downward in a perpetual gentle fall. Scientists call it marine snow, and the name is exactly right. A soundless, endless snowfall of pale specks drifting down through the dark, the only steady motion in all that black water. It falls in every ocean, at every hour, a quiet weather that never stops. And unlike the snow of the surface world, it never melts and never ends, only gathers, age after age, on the floor far below. Each flake may take weeks to complete its long descent to the bottom of the trench, sinking only a short way each day, turning and tumbling as it goes. So much of it is eaten or dissolved on the way down that only a small share of what leaves the surface ever reaches the deepest floor, which is part of why food is so precious there, and why the creatures of the trench have learned to want so little. The deepest creatures live, in a sense, on the slow gift of the surface, on a soft snow made of the world above, falling forever into the world below, the only bridge between the sunlit sea and the lightless one. There is something tender in that long, slow fall. A single flake of marine snow drifting down toward the Challenger deep sinks for days and days through kilometre after kilometre of darkening water, past the twilight and the midnight zones, past depths where the pressure climbs beyond all reckoning, until at last it settles on the deep floor to become a meal or a grain of sediment. It is among the longest, gentlest journeys anything takes on this planet, a quiet snow that began as life in the sun and ends in the deepest dark, carrying the warmth of the surface all the way down into the cold. Now and then, a far larger gift arrives. The body of some great creature from the upper sea sinks all the way to the floor, and around it gathers a sudden feast, whole crowds of deep animals drawn from the dark to a banquet that may sustain them for years. Everything that lives at the bottom is fed in the end by that long fall from above, by patience, and by the steady kindness of a world it will never see. All of that slow snowfall, gathered over millions of years, has left the trench floor blanketed in a deep, soft sediment. The lower seabed is not bare rock, but a thick, pale ooze. Fine particles built up grain by grain across unimaginable spans of time, a mattress of sediment meters deep, soft enough that a heavy vessel settling onto it stirs up a slow, silent cloud. It is among the most undisturbed surfaces anywhere on Earth, a floor where nothing burrows quickly and nothing rushes, where each new layer is laid down so gently that the whole deep record of the falling snow is preserved in order. In some deep places, the sediment gathers so unhurriedly that it would take 1,000 years to build a layer no thicker than a coin, so that a single handful of that pale ooze holds the dust of an immense stretch of time. To settle onto that floor is to come to rest on the slow accumulation of ages, a softness made entirely of time, a bed of centuries, laid down one fallen flake at a time, and the stillness of that floor is almost beyond imagining. Far above, the ocean is restless. Waves, tides, currents, storms, the constant stirring of wind and sun. But at the bottom of the trench, sheltered within its narrow walls and weighed down by all that water, the sea barely moves at all. There are only the faintest, slowest of currents, moving through in no hurry whatsoever, so gentle that the cloud of sediment a vessel stirs up can hang in the water for a long, long while before it finally settles back down. A footprint pressed into the deep floor might remain there, undisturbed for decades or longer, since there is no wave or wind or burrowing throng to smooth it away. The faint tracks that a robotic explorer leaves as it settles and lifts off again may still be legible long after the machine and the people who guided it are gone, written into the soft floor like a message in a place where almost nothing is ever erased. It is one of the most motionless environments on the planet, a place where stillness is not a passing moment but the permanent condition. Nothing hurries down there. Nothing has needed to hurry for a very long time, and nothing ever erases the gentle marks that the rare visitor leaves behind. With so little motion comes a silence as deep as the dark. There is no wind at the bottom of the sea, no waves breaking, no rain, none of the 1,000 small sounds that fill the surface world. The water is so still and so heavy that the deep floor of the trench is among the quietest places anywhere on Earth, a hush so complete that the loudest thing for kilometers might be the faint settling of a single grain of sediment or the soft pulse of a creature passing nearby in the dark. There is no birdsong here, no rustle of leaves, no human voice, none of the endless layered noise that fills almost every place a person has ever stood. In the rare moments when a submersible shuts off its motors and simply rests on the floor, the only sound a visitor reports is the faint working of their own breath, and beyond it nothing, a depth of quiet that the surface world has no real way to offer. It is a silence older than music, older than speech, a quiet the surface world has all but forgotten how to hold. The deepest place on the planet is also very nearly its most silent, a stillness so deep it would feel, to a visitor, less like an absence of sound than like a presence all its own. Yet sound does reach down there, given time, and it travels strangely through that cold, dense water. In the deep sea, sound moves faster than it does in air, and farther, carrying for enormous distances through the still black water. The deep ocean even holds a hidden layer where sound bends and lingers, a natural channel that can carry a single low call across an entire ocean basin. Far above the trench, the great whales sing into this channel, and their long, low songs roll outward for hundreds and hundreds of kilometers through the dark. A single whale calling in the deep may be heard by another of its kind an ocean away. Two creatures separated by a distance greater than many countries, joined by nothing but a low note carried faithfully through the cold. The deepest, longest calls of the great whales are among the most powerful sounds any animal makes, and in that hidden sound channel they can travel for hundreds upon hundreds of kilometers before they fade, so that the sea, for all its silence, is quietly laced with voices reaching across enormous distances. The deep is silent, and yet it is also a vast conductor of sound, a place where a single voice, pitched low enough, can travel almost the width of the world, and where the loneliest call need never go entirely unheard. For all its silence and stillness, the trench is not entirely without fire. Scattered along the great curve of the Mariana Arc near the trench lies a chain of undersea volcanoes, more than a dozen submarine mountains and vents, quietly active far beneath the waves. Here the planet's inner heat leaks gently into the cold deep sea, warming small patches of water, building strange mineral chimneys, feeding pockets of life that need no sunlight at all. At some of these vents, the water emerging from the rock is scaldingly hot, yet it cools within inches in the surrounding chill so that warmth and cold sit pressed together within the span of a hand, and creatures arrange themselves carefully along that narrow margin. It is a remarkable contrast, held in a single region, the coldest, deepest, darkest water on Earth, threaded through with quiet warmth rising from the heart of the planet. This whole curving region belongs to the great ring of volcanic country that circles the Pacific, where the restless edges of the plates raise fire from below, and yet here that fire mostly stays gentle and submerged, warming the dark rather than troubling it. Fire and cold side by side in the deepest dark, neither one disturbing the great calm of the place, each keeping to its own small territory in the endless night. One of those undersea volcanoes holds a wonder found in only one other place anyone knows of in the entire solar system. At a submarine peak called Daikoku, deep beneath the Pacific, there is a pool of molten sulfur, a small lake of liquid yellow held in a crater far below the waves, gently churning, covered with a dark elastic skin that swells and shifts as gases bubble up beneath it. Pools of liquid sulfur like this are vanishingly rare. The only other place such a thing has ever been seen is Io, a volcanic moon of distant Jupiter, hundreds of millions of miles away across the cold of space. To find its twin, you would have to leave the Earth entirely and travel to another planet's moon. And yet here it is, simmering away in the dark of the Western Pacific, a little piece of another world tucked into the floor of our own, so that to gaze upon this hidden pool is, in a sense, to glimpse a corner of an alien moon without ever leaving home. Not far away, another vent does something stranger still with the breath of the planet. At a site called Champagne, named for the bubbles that gave it away, carbon dioxide rises from the sea floor not as gas but as droplets of liquid. Pale beads of pure liquid carbon dioxide seeping up from the rock and drifting upward through the cold water, like the rising bubbles in a glass of fine wine. It is one of only a couple of places on Earth where carbon dioxide pours from the seabed in liquid form, made possible only by the great pressure and chill of the deep, which keep as a liquid what would, at the surface, simply hiss away as gas. Strange mats of microbes carpet the rock around it, living off the planet's slow exhalation, thriving on the very breath of the Earth. The planet exhales, very softly, into the black water, and its breath comes out as rising pearls. The deep is full of these quiet impossibilities, going on whether or not anyone is there to marvel. A whole catalogue of wonders performed nightly for no audience at all. Stranger even than the fire are the mountains of cold mud. Along the slope above the trench rise great domes built not of lava but of soft pale clay, serpentine mud volcanoes, some of the largest of their kind anywhere on Earth, slowly oozing up a cool mineral-rich mud from far below the sea floor. As the diving plate sinks, water is squeezed out of it deep within the planet, and that water rises back up through the crust, transforming the rock it passes into a slick pale clay that swells gently to the surface and builds these broad, quiet hills. They do not erupt with heat. Some of these mud domes are enormous, rising kilometres high and stretching tens of kilometres wide, ranking among the largest such features known anywhere on the planet, and yet they grow so gradually that their swelling could never be felt. They simply well upward, century by century, carrying material from kilometres down into the open water of the deep sea floor, a slow, soft fountain of the planet's hidden insides, lifting the buried depths gently up toward the dark. Those mud volcanoes turn out to be gardens in disguise. The pale mineral fluid that seeps from them is rich in the very chemistry that certain microbes can feed on, and so these cool domes, far from the warm volcanic vents, host their own quiet communities of life. Tube worms, small shellfish, mats of bacteria, all gathered around the gentle upwelling of mud. Life clusters wherever the planet offers it a meal, and here the meal is the slow leakage of the deep crust itself. The water seeping from these clay domes is strange stuff indeed, so unusual in its chemistry that it more resembles the fluids imagined for distant icy moons than anything found on the ordinary surface of the earth, and yet creatures gather around it and flourish. Pale clams and tube worms and crabs cluster on the slopes of these mud mountains, drawn to the seeping fluid, building small communities on the gentle outflow, life finding a foothold even on the strangest of soils, fed by the breath of the buried plate. It is a kind of oasis built from clay and chemistry, thriving in the cold and the dark, fed not by sunlight but by the slow breathing of the rock far below. There are whole living worlds out here that have never once needed the sun, gardens blooming in the black around the gentlest of springs. Some of that rising mud may be carrying up something even more precious than minerals. Where the deep fluids meet the cold sea water, the chemistry that unfolds is the very kind that some scientists believe may have helped life begin on the early Earth. Simple molecules assembling into more complex ones, drawing their energy from rock and water rather than from the sun. There are researchers who study the serpentine springs of the Mariana region precisely because they may echo the cradles where the first living things stirred billions of years ago in a young and sunless sea. The very reactions that turn rock into clay, there also release the simple fuels that the earliest life may have fed upon, before there were plants, before there was breathable air. The deepest, oldest, most alien-seeming corner of the ocean may hold a faint memory of how life itself got started. Down there in the lightless chill, there may be a clue to the very first warmth, the quiet possibility that everything alive began not in the sun, but somewhere dark and deep and still. The whole region, in fact, is a place where the crust of the planet is being born and unmade at once. While the old seafloor dives down into the trench on one side, on the other side, behind the arc of islands, the crust is gently pulling apart, and fresh new seafloor is rising up to fill the gap. It is called a back arc basin, and it means that within a single stretch of the Western Pacific, the Earth is both swallowing its old skin and growing new skin side by side in the same slow breath. The very arc of islands stands between the two, the trench swallowing crust on its ocean side, fresh seafloor welling up on the far side, so that the whole region is, in effect, a narrow ribbon of the planet being unmade and remade at once. Destruction and creation, folded into one quiet seascape. The rock that sinks into the trench will travel down into the hot interior, soften, and rise again somewhere else as fresh crust or as the molten stuff of volcanoes, so that nothing is truly lost, only made new in a cycle that has turned for billions of years. The trench is not only an ending, it is part of a great circulation, a place where the planet turns itself over, endlessly, far too slowly for any single life to see, a slow wheel of stone whose every turning takes longer than the whole history of our kind. Set the geology gently aside now, and return to the human story. to the long, stubborn effort to reach the bottom with living eyes. For most of history, the deepest sea was simply unreachable, as remote as the surface of the moon and far darker. No one had been there. No one was even sure a person could go there and return. The pressure seemed too great, the dark too total, the distance too far. For centuries, sailors who crossed these waters could only guess at what lay beneath their keels, and the deep was filled, in the imagination, with monsters and mysteries born entirely of not knowing. Old charts marked the open ocean with sea serpents and warnings, and many believed there was a depth below which nothing could live at all, a lifeless cellar at the foot of the sea, too dark and too heavy for anything to endure. And yet the trench drew people anyway, the way high mountains and far horizons always have, not because anyone had to go, but because it was there, the lowest place on earth, unseen and waiting, and some part of the human heart could not let it stay unvisited forever. The same restless wonder that sent people to the poles and the peaks, and eventually the moon turned in time downward toward the dark. The first to descend all the way did so in the year 1960, in a vessel unlike anything before it. It was called the Trieste, a strange balloon-like craft built around a great float of gasoline, with a tiny round steel cabin slung beneath it just big enough for two. On the 23rd of January, two men climbed into that small sphere and began to sink. A Swiss explorer named Jacques Picard and an American naval officer named Don Walsh, lowering themselves deliberately into the deepest water on the planet, with nothing but a few centimeters of steel between them and a pressure no human had ever felt. The little cabin was so cramped that the two men could barely move, sitting almost knee to knee in a steel ball scarcely wider than a person is tall. The walls of that sphere were enormously thick, a shell of solid steel built to withstand a force that would have crumpled an ordinary submarine like paper, and the only view of the outside world was through a single cone-shaped window of specially made material, no larger than a face. They could not be rescued if anything went wrong. There was no one who could reach them, and down they went anyway, slowly into the black, two ordinary human bodies, descending toward a place that would press on their thin steel shell with a force beyond anything in human experience. The descent itself was an exercise in stillness almost beyond belief. The Trieste sank for nearly 5 hours, almost 5 full hours of falling slowly through the darkening water, watching the last blue light vanish and the depth gauge wind down into numbers no crewed vessel had ever reached. The craft descended at a little under a meter each second, a steady, unhurried sinking, the great float of gasoline above the cabin keeping it just heavy enough to ease downward and no faster. There was nothing to do but wait and sink, deeper and deeper, the cabin growing colder, the dark outside the little window absolute. Imagine the quiet inside that sphere. Two people, descending in near silence for hours, into a place no living thing from the surface had ever gone, with only the faint creak of steel and the slow turning of the gauge to mark the passing of the depths. They watched the water outside the little window shift from bright blue to deep blue, to a darkness with no colour in it at all, the last of the daylight surrendering somewhere far above. Down and down and down, with the whole weight of the ocean gathering above them, every minute carrying them past depths no human eyes had ever witnessed. When they finally touched the bottom, something happened that neither man ever forgot. As the Trieste settled gently onto the pale sediment far below, stirring up a soft cloud of it, the two explorers looked out the small window, and there, drifting calmly in the beam of their light, was a living creature, a flat, pale, fish-like form, moving unhurried across the deepest floor on Earth. Whether it was truly a fish, or some other soft, deep animal, is still debated by scientists to this day, but the meaning of the moment was clear and luminous. Even here, at the very lowest point of the entire planet, in the cold and the crushing dark, life was already present and entirely at home. The two men had braced themselves, perhaps, to find a dead and empty void at the floor of the sea, and instead the first thing they saw was something alive. The first humans ever to reach the lowest place on Earth were greeted, it seemed, by something already living there, calm and unhurried, as if it had been expecting them all along. They stayed at the bottom for only about 20 minutes, those first two visitors. The cloud of sediment they had stirred up rose so thickly that it blotted out the view, and there was little they could do but rest there a while in the dark, knowing they had reached a place no one had ever reached, before beginning the long climb back toward the light. 20 minutes, after years of preparation and a journey of almost 5 hours down, a brief, quiet visit to the deepest point on Earth, followed by an even longer climb back up toward the light. But it was enough. It proved once and for all that a human being could descend to the very bottom of the ocean and return alive to tell of it. The deepest door had been opened, and the world that lay beyond it was, against every fear, survivable. And for the first time in all of history, a person had stood, in a sense, at the lowest place the planet has to offer, and come home to speak of what they saw. There was a moment on that dive that might have ended everything, and it is striking how calmly it passed. Somewhere near the bottom, one of the thick outer windows of the Trieste cracked with a muffled jolt, a sound the two men felt as much as heard in the small steel sphere. At that depth, a true failure of the hull would have been instant and absolute. And yet, they did not panic. They noted it, judged that the craft was still sound, completed their time on the bottom, and rose safely all the way back to the surface. The outer pane had taken the strain and held, doing exactly the job it was built for, even as it announced the strain with that single, startling sound. It is a small portrait of grace under the greatest pressure there is. Two people, kilometres beneath the sea, meeting a crack in their only shelter with quiet, steady calm and coming home. Sometimes courage is not the absence of a frightening moment, but the steadiness to breathe through it and carry on. For more than half a century after that first dive, no human returned to the very bottom, until a filmmaker decided to go alone. In the year 2012, the director James Cameron climbed into a slender, vertical lime green submersible he had helped design, a craft built like a torpedo to fall straight down and rise straight back up, and descended by himself to the floor of the Challenger deep. The little vessel was engineered to sink swiftly, taking only a couple of hours to reach a depth that had once cost the first crew nearly 5, and the pilot rode it curled in a steel sphere barely large enough to sit inside, his knees drawn up, watching the dark through a small, thick window. He was the first person ever to reach the deepest point of the ocean solo, and only the third to reach it at all. More than half a century after the first descent, only a single human had reached that floor in the years between. Where the first crew had managed 20 crowded minutes, he spent hours down there alone in the dark, easing across the deep floor, gathering samples, watching the soft sediment swirl in his lights. One person, at the lowest point on the planet, with the entire ocean overhead and no other soul within reach. He had spent years building the craft that carried him, and then he climbed into it and went down by himself into the deepest dark there is. He described the bottom not as a place of menace, but as one of profound, desolate stillness, an alien, lunar landscape, soft and pale and utterly silent, stretching away into the dark beyond his lights. There was no terror in his account, only a kind of awe at the sheer remoteness of it, the completeness of the solitude. He spoke of how empty and silent it felt, how far it lay from everything warm and familiar, and yet how strangely serene. A place utterly removed from every human concern, where there was simply nothing to do but look. He was further from another human being than almost anyone has ever been, sealed in a tiny sphere at the very floor of the sea, and what he found there was not a nightmare but a vast, quiet emptiness, strangely peaceful in its silence. The deepest place on Earth, met face to face, turned out to feel less like a threat and more like a kind of enormous, weightless calm. The calm of a place that has never known a single moment of hurry. One of the men from that very first dive helped make the second one possible. Don Walsh, who had ridden the Trieste to the bottom in 1960 as a young naval officer, was there again in 2012. By then an old man, a living link between the two journeys, advising the new expedition and waiting on the surface as the green submersible sank. More than 50 years separated the two dives, an entire human lifetime, and he had seen both. The first cautious plunge into the unknown and the polished modern descent that followed. He had been a young officer when he first sank into that dark, and a white-haired elder when he watched it done again, and in between he had carried the memory of the deepest place on Earth through all the long years of an ordinary life on the surface. For more than half a century he was one of only 2 people alive who had seen that floor with their own eyes, a keeper of a memory almost no one else on the planet could share, until at last others followed him down. There is something deeply moving in that single thread of continuity. The same person present at the first descent and the next, a quiet keeper of the deep's memory across half a century, watching a new generation fall once more toward the floor he had touched as a young man. The deepest point did not stay the province of lone adventurers for long. In the years that followed, a wealthy explorer named Victor Vescovo set out to dive to the bottom of every one of the world's oceans, the deepest point of each of the 5, and in 2019 he descended to the floor of the Challenger Deep in a craft built to go there again and again. He reached the lowest point of every ocean on the planet one after another in a single grand expedition, a feat no one had ever attempted before, planting the journey's end on the floor of the deepest sea of all. Where earlier dives had been singular events, his submersible was designed for routine, and he returned to the deepest point several times over, even spending hours mapping its quiet floor and carrying other passengers down to see it. A handful of people, in a single expedition, reached a place that for most of history not one living soul had ever touched. The bottom of the world was becoming, if not ordinary, then at least reachable more than once, a place a well-made vessel could visit and revisit. The deepest dark was slowly, steadily being brought within human reach, no longer a one-time miracle, but a destination, however rare and hard won. Among those who have since made the descent is a woman whose life has spanned the full vertical reach of human exploration. Catherine Sullivan, who had once walked in the emptiness of space high above the Earth, climbed down into a submersible and sank all the way to that lowest seabed, becoming the first woman ever to touch the deepest point in any sea, and the first person to have travelled both to orbit and to the lowest place on the planet. From the black of orbit to the black of the deepest sea, the 2 most remote darknesses a human can reach, both touched by the same pair of eyes. To have floated weightless above the blue curve of the whole world, and then to have sunk to the very bottom of its deepest ocean, to have seen the planet from its farthest outside and its farthest inside both, is a span of experience almost no other person has ever held. The distance from the height of her orbit to the depth of that dive spans very nearly the full reach of where a human being can go and return, from far above the air to far beneath the sea, and she alone, of everyone who has ever lived, has touched both ends of it. It is a quiet marvel of a life, stretched between the highest height and the lowest deep, each of them silent, each of them dark, each of them almost impossibly far from the warm-lit middle where the rest of us live. Long before any of these people went down, machines went first and went often, and they remain the deep's most tireless explorers. Robotic vessels tethered to ships far above by slender cables, or set free to roam on their own, have descended into the Mariana Trench again and again, carrying cameras and lights and sampling arms into a place too far and too dark for most human visits. One Japanese robotic craft, lowered on a long tether in the mid-1990s, became the first machine ever to touch the very bottom, reaching almost the full depth of the Challenger Deep and returning with images and samples from a floor no camera had seen. Others have followed, mapping the floor, filming the snailfish, gathering the pale sediment, moving through the black on errands of pure curiosity. Some are guided in real time by scientists sitting on a ship far above, watching the deep on glowing screens as it scrolls past, seeing in comfort what no human body could safely go and see. They feel no cold and no fear and need no air, and so they can linger in the deep far longer than any person. Quiet, mechanical eyes, opened wide in the dark, looking calmly at a world no human will ever casually visit, and carrying its images gently back up into the light. Through those eyes, a remarkable picture of the deep floor has slowly come into focus, and it is far from the barren waste one might expect. The bottom of the trench, seen in the lights of these machines, is a soft, pale plain dotted with life and texture. The tracks of small creatures crossing the sediment, the delicate forms of the great single cells, the occasional drift of a pale amphipod, or the ghost of a snailfish at the edge of the light. It is quiet and dim and almost colourless, and yet it is unmistakably a living place, marked everywhere by the gentle comings and goings of its inhabitants. Here and there the smooth ooze is dimpled and trailed with the marks of passing creatures, small mounds, faint furrows, the soft handwriting of a hidden community going about its slow business. A sea cucumber leaves a winding trail, a burrowing worm raises a tiny volcano of cast sediment, a resting fish presses a shallow hollow into the ooze, each a small sign that something living has lately been there, in a place a human eye had never before seen. The deepest floor on Earth is not a dead end. It is a soft, dark meadow, grazed and crossed and quietly tended by lives that have never known the sun, busier and gentler than anyone above had ever dared to imagine. The samples those machines bring up have rewritten what science thought possible for life. From the bottom of the Mariana Trench, researchers have hauled back sediment teeming with microbes, fragile creatures intact, whole communities adapted to a place once thought far too harsh for anything to endure. Each return reveals the deep to be richer, busier, more thoroughly inhabited than anyone had dared to guess. New kinds of creatures turn up almost every time anyone looks, so that the catalogue of the deep keeps growing year by year, with no end in sight. Samples brought up from the trench have revealed microbes never seen before, fish unknown to science, and tiny creatures by the dozen that no one had ever named. Each haul a small reminder that the deep is not a settled, finished place, but a frontier still being met for the very first time. The lesson arriving from the bottom of the world is a gentle and expansive one. Life is far more stubborn, far more inventive, and far more widespread than our fears for it suggest. Wherever there is the faintest possibility of living, something, it seems, has already found a way to be there, calmly, and to call it home, even in the coldest, darkest, most crushing corner of the planet. So little of this deep world has actually been seen that the maps of it remain mostly guesses. Far more of the deep sea floor has been charted at a coarse, blurry resolution than has ever been viewed up close, and only the tiniest fraction of the trench has been visited by anything at all. Most of the Mariana Trench has never been touched by a light, or a camera, or a sounding more precise than a faint echo from far above. There is more detailed mapping of the surface of the Moon, and of Mars, and of distant Venus than of the floor of our own deepest sea. It is a strange truth that humanity has better pictures of worlds millions of miles away than of the seabed beneath its own ships. Only a small fraction of the deep ocean floor has been mapped in any fine detail, and a smaller fraction still has ever been seen up close by human eyes or cameras. Most of it remains charted only in the blurriest outline, sketched by sound from far above. The largest unexplored place on Earth is not a jungle or a desert or a polar waste. It is down there, in the dark, beneath the waves, waiting in a silence almost no one has ever disturbed. An entire hidden landscape, vaster than any continent, still mostly unseen by the species that lives on the very same planet. That fact turns the usual picture of exploration upside down. People have walked on the Moon 250,000 miles away, yet only a handful have ever reached the bottom of the ocean on their own planet, far fewer than have flown into space. The deepest sea is, in a real sense, less travelled than the sky. It is harder in some ways to send a person safely down to that deepest hollow than to send one into orbit, because the pressure down there is so much more punishing than the simple emptiness above. Empty space pulls outward only a little, while the deep sea presses inward with the weight of a mountain. The last great frontier may not lie outward among the stars at all. It may lie straight down, beneath the surface of the sea, closer than any planet and stranger than most. A wilderness you could sail over in an afternoon, and yet one that almost no one will ever truly enter. The Challenger Deep is not even a single point, it turns out, but a small chain of even deeper hollows strung along the floor of the trench. Careful mapping has revealed 3 separate basins lying end to end, each a few kilometres long, each a slightly different shade of deep, and one of the 3, the eastern one, edges out the others as the very lowest of all. To find the single deepest spot on the planet, you must travel to the eastern end of an already impossibly deep valley, to one particular basin within it, to the lowest patch of its soft floor. Even with the finest modern instruments, pinning down which basin holds the very lowest point, and by how few meters, has taken decades of careful measurement, the figures refined again and again. The deepest place on Earth is not a vague region, but a specific, findable spot, a single quiet hollow in the dark that the whole rest of the planet rises away from in every direction. The one place toward which, if you let go of everything everywhere, all the world would seem to slope. There is a second great deep within the Mariana Trench, less famous than the first but nearly as profound. It is called the Serena Deep, lying some distance from the Challenger Deep along the same long crescent, and it too plunges past 10,000 meters into the dark, within a few hundred meters of the deepest point itself, a near rival hidden in the same vast trench. There is a third great hollow here as well, deeper than almost anywhere else in any other ocean, so that this single crescent holds more than one of the lowest places on the entire planet. For a place so staggeringly deep, to be merely the second deepest in a single trench gives some sense of how extraordinary this whole region is. The Serena Deep was reached by a robotic explorer too, which found that even there, far from the most famous hollow, the floor was scattered with life and dusted with the same endless snow. The Mariana Trench does not hold one record-breaking abyss, but several, scattered along its length like the lowest notes in a long piece of music. To fall into the Serena Deep would be to descend further than almost anywhere else on Earth, and still not reach the very bottom of its own trench, proof that the deep keeps more than one secret, and hides its wonders in more than one place. Imagine releasing a small, heavy stone at the surface of the sea, above the Challenger Deep and letting it sink, untouched, all the way down. It would fall for hours, slipping through the sunlit water, through the long blue twilight, into the black, sinking and sinking through pressures that climb without end, until at last, perhaps an hour or more later, it would settle without a sound onto the soft floor kilometers below. In its first minute it would pass the depth a free diver might reach. Within an hour it would be deeper than any submarine could safely follow, and still it would have a long way yet to fall before it touched the bottom. A single dropped stone takes most of a morning to reach the bottom of the world. Even the instruments that scientists send down must fall freely for hours to get there, and then, releasing their weights, rise for hours more to return, a single visit to the floor swallowing the better part of a day. The depth is not just a number on a page, it is a distance so great that even gravity, pulling straight down through water, needs a long, unhurried while to cross it. The deep is far in a way that time itself can measure, a place you reach not in steps or miles but in patient hours of falling. The water filling the trench is not local. It has travelled an immense distance to arrive there. Much of the coldest, deepest water in all the world's oceans is born at the surface near the poles, where it grows so cold and so dense that it sinks and then creeps slowly along the bottom of the sea for centuries, spreading outward across the globe. It is a strange and humbling thought that the water filling the deepest trench in the warm western Pacific may have begun its journey under polar skies, in a place of ice and long winter nights, half a world and many lifetimes away. Some of the water resting in the Mariana Trench may have last touched the sky near Antarctica ages ago, before beginning its long, unhurried crawl across the floor of the Pacific. It travelled not as a current you could see, but as a vast cold mass creeping along the bottom of the world, taking centuries to cross from one end of the planet to the other. The deep waters of the far south are among the coldest and densest anywhere, and once they sink, they spread north along the seafloor for thousands of kilometres, filling the deepest basins of every ocean, the Mariana Trench among them, with water carried from the bottom of the world. The deep is fed by the cold breath of distant poles, water with a memory of the surface so old that whole human histories have unfolded since it last saw the sun, so that to dip a hand into the bottom of the trench would be to touch a piece of sky frozen out of the air before your great-grandparents were born. The trench plays a quiet part in the great breathing of the whole planet too. As the old seafloor sinks into it, the rock carries down with it the remains of countless living things, and the carbon locked inside them, drawing that carbon deep into the earth and storing it there for ages. Some of what descends is carried down hundreds of kilometres into the hot interior. Some is melted and returned to the surface ages later through the volcanoes of the island arc, completing a circuit of carbon that runs through the whole body of the planet. A single atom of carbon, once part of a living thing in the sunlit sea, might ride the sinking plate down into the dark, rest within the rock for tens of millions of years, and one day rise again into the air to be breathed by something not yet born. The deepest places in the ocean are, in this way, among the planet's great storehouses, quiet, silent vaults where the leftovers of the living world are folded gently back into the rock and carried down out of sight. What sinks into a trench does not simply vanish. It is taken into the body of the earth itself, locked away in stone for tens of millions of years. The trench is not separate from the world above. It is part of how the planet keeps its long balance, taking in a little of the surface with every age that passes, and holding it safely in the dark, a slow and steady housekeeping that has helped keep the whole world livable across the ages. There is a curious gift the deep gives to some of the creatures that live in it. It makes a few of them grow strangely large. In the cold, dark, slow waters of the deep sea, certain animals reach sizes far beyond their shallow water relatives, giant versions of ordinary things, growing slowly and living long in the chill. Scientists call it deep-sea gigantism, and it seems to arise from the cold and the calm, a gentler life, a longer one, a body that keeps growing across many quiet years. In these chilled waters, some ordinary creatures swell to startling sizes: spindly-legged sea spiders broad as dinner plates, single-shelled giants, soft creatures grown far past anything their shallow cousins reach. The cold slows the body's inner clock and stretches each life out longer, and a longer life means more time to grow. Cold water also holds more of the dissolved breath that large bodies need, so the chill that might seem so hostile turns out to be, in its own way, a maker of giants. The deep does not only shrink the foam cup and crush the empty spaces. For the living things truly at home there, it can do the opposite, granting size and length of days, and a long unhurried span of years in the dark, as if the cold itself were a kind of slow and generous keeper. Time itself seems to move differently in the deep. With the cold so constant and the food so scarce, life down there runs at a gentler tempo. Creatures grow by tiny degrees, stir only when they must, and can live for a very long time. Some deep-sea animals are thought to live for centuries, hanging in the same dark water across spans of time that would see whole forests rise and fall above them. A single creature might outlast every person who was alive on the day it was born. There is no rush down in the trench, no seasons pressing change upon anything, no day or night to mark the hours. A life down there can unfold across hundreds of years, steady and almost timeless, in a world where nothing hurries and almost nothing ever changes, where a century may pass as quietly as a single afternoon does up in the sun. For all the cold and the dark and the crushing weight then, the overwhelming impression of the deep trench is not of violence, but of an enormous, settled calm. Nothing storms down there, nothing races. The pressure presses evenly, the cold holds steady, the dark stays whole, and the few slow currents drift through without urgency across the ages. It is, by almost any measure, one of the most stable and unchanging environments anywhere on the planet. A place that has stayed very nearly the same through ice ages and warm ages alike, through every flood and drought and upheaval that has ever shaken the surface, untroubled by any of it. While the world above froze and thawed and reshaped its coastlines and forests over and over, the deep simply held its cold, dark peace, unmoved. To picture it is to picture a vast, dark, motionless calm, holding itself perfectly still at the very bottom of everything, a stillness that has outlasted every storm there has ever been. In the layers above the trench floor where the last sunlight has long since failed, the dark is not entirely without light, for the creatures there make their own. Through the midnight waters above the deepest sea drift, countless living things that glow with a soft, cold light of their own making, flickering blue-green sparks in an ocean of black. Some flash to startle a predator, some to lure a meal, some perhaps simply to find one another in the dark. A few even release a glowing cloud into the water and dart away, leaving a burst of cold light behind to confuse whatever was chasing them, vanishing into the black while the false fire fades. A great many of the creatures living in the deep waters of the world can make their own light in this way, so many that living light may be the most common form of communication anywhere on the planet, far more widespread than any sound or song. It is one of the most ordinary ways of living in the deep, this quiet glowing, and yet almost no one ever sees it. Far above the trench, the black water is quietly alive with gentle living constellations, rising and fading in a sky no human eye was ever meant to watch. A slow, silent fireworks that has been playing, unwitnessed, since long before there were any eyes at all. Down on the deep floor itself, among the most numerous of the larger animals are the sea cucumbers, soft and slow and strange, drifting and creeping across the sediment in great gentle herds. They are simple, boneless creatures, some of them faintly translucent, gliding over the ooze and quietly swallowing it to draw out the scraps of food it holds. A few kinds can even lift gently off the floor and swim, ballooning through the dark water, while others spend their whole lives grazing the sediment without ever rising. On the deepest plains of the world's oceans, these soft grazers can make up the great majority of all the larger life there is, the unhurried cattle of the abyss, endlessly tending the floor. They ask nothing of the world but the sediment beneath them, and they cross it so gradually that watching one would be like watching the hour hand of a clock. They are perfectly suited to a place where nothing is in any hurry at all, turning the endless rain of detritus, mouthful by patient mouthful, back into the living world. Taken all together, the deep sea is not some narrow fringe of the living world, but by far its largest part. The oceans hold almost all the room there is for life on this planet. The vast majority of the space any living thing could occupy lies underwater, and most of that is deep, dark, and cold. The bright, warm surface world of forests and fields and sunlit shallows, the only world most people ever picture when they imagine life on Earth, is a thin exception, a brilliant rind on a very deep fruit. Count up all the space where living things can possibly dwell, every forest and field, every reef and river, and every dark cubic mile of open sea, and the overwhelming majority of it is deep ocean, cold and dim, and far from the sun. The land we live on, and the bright shallow seas, are only the thinnest trim around the edges of a habitat that is mostly deep water. The great body of the living world is the dark sea, and the trench is its lowest, stillest room. The true home of life by sheer volume is the deep, quiet, dim, and immense. The Mariana Trench is only the lowest room in a house that is mostly dark, and that darkness, not the daylight, is the planet's largest dwelling place. the ordinary condition of a life on this world, with the sunlit surface as the rare and lovely exception. Because it changes so little and so slowly, the deep sea is something like a living museum of the planet's past. Conditions down in the trench, the cold, the dark, the steady pressure, have stayed much the same across spans of time that have utterly transformed the surface, and some of the creatures there belong to ancient lineages little altered for ages. To look at the life of the deep is, in a way, to glimpse echoes of an older Earth, preserved in the one environment steady enough to keep them. Now and then a creature is hauled up from the deep that scientists had thought long extinct, known only from fossils in ancient stone, a living relic, still quietly going about its life in waters that never asked it to change. There are fish and shells and other creatures of the deep, whose forms have scarcely altered across tens of millions of years, looking today almost exactly as their ancestors looked in the age of the great reptiles, kept unchanged by a world that itself refused to change around them. While the bright surface reinvented itself again and again, the deep simply held on, keeping its old ways in the dark. The bottom of the sea is among the most conservative places on the planet, a keeper of very old patterns of life, a quiet archive where the past is not buried but still gently breathing. To descend into the trench is, in a sense, to travel backward in time as well as downward in space, to visit a corner of the present world that still runs, in some ways, on the rules of an ancient one, where forms long vanished from the surface go quietly on, kept whole by the changeless dark. The slowness reaches even into the pace of change itself. With so little energy and such steady conditions, evolution in the deep can run at a gentler tempo, the generations turning over without the constant pressure that drives faster change in richer, brighter places. Life there is not racing to keep up with the shifting world, because the world around it barely shifts at all. There is a kind of evolutionary calm to it, an unforced unfolding across enormous stretches of time in a place where the rules almost never change. A body that works well in the deep can keep working, more or less unchanged, for a very long span of ages, because the conditions it was shaped for stay constant from one era to the next. On the restless surface, a creature must keep adapting to shifting climates and seasons and rivals, or fall behind. But in the changeless deep, there is far less pressure to become anything new, and a form that fits can simply endure, generation after generation, as the world holds its breath around it. The deep does not hurry its creatures, and it has not hurried them for a very long time. They have had the luxury of changing only as much as they needed to, and no more, a kind of evolutionary patience the restless surface has rarely allowed. Many of the deepest creatures share a particular ghostly quality. They have little or no colour at all. Where there is no light, there is no use for the pigments that paint the creatures of the surface, and so the animals of the deep are often pale, translucent, or a soft and uniform white. The snailfish nearly clear, the amphipods faintly milky, whole communities the colour of frost. Colour is a gift of light, and where the light never comes, it quietly falls away. Stranger still, some deep creatures are a deep red instead of white, since red light cannot reach those depths, and so a red body appears to any eye down there as black as the water itself, a colour worn not to be seen, but to vanish. It is a strange thought, that down in the trench, the brightest scarlet and the deepest black would look exactly alike, that a creature could be vivid red and perfectly hidden at the very same time, simply because the light that would reveal its colour never arrives. There is a stark, simple beauty to it, a world of pale and colourless creatures hanging in black water, lit only now and then by the cold glow of a passing spark. The deep has no need for the bright hues of the day. It dresses its life in white and clear and shadow, in the muted palette of a place where appearances mean almost nothing at all. Many of those same creatures have also let go of sight, or nearly so. In a place of permanent darkness, eyes can become more burden than gift, and so a number of deep-sea animals have small eyes, or dim ones, or none at all, investing instead in other ways of knowing the world. They feel the faint stir of the water, taste the chemistry of a distant meal, sense the soft pressure of something moving nearby. Some deep fish are fringed along their bodies with fine sensing lines that read the water like a second skin, feeling the world as a pattern of gentle pushes and pulls long before anything comes near. Others trail long, delicate feelers far out into the dark, or carry whisker-like sensors on their fins, reaching out to touch and taste the water around them, mapping a lightless world entirely by feel, seeing, in their own way, with the whole surface of their bodies. They navigate a lightless world with senses the surface barely uses, and they do it flawlessly, having never needed eyes to begin with. The deep has taught its creatures to know their world by touch and taste and the gentlest of vibrations, a way of sensing as quiet and sure as the dark itself, a knowing that needs no light at all. What replaces sight is often an exquisite sensitivity to movement and scent. Deep-sea hunters and scavengers can detect the faintest trace of food drifting through the water, or the slightest tremor of something stirring nearby, picking up signals far too subtle for a surface creature to notice. In a place where a meal might arrive only rarely, this delicacy of sensing is everything. The ability to feel a single soft disturbance in kilometers of still black water and turn, unerringly, toward it. When food does fall, scavengers can gather at it with surprising speed, arriving out of the empty dark within hours, drawn from far away by the faintest trace spreading through the water. A single scent carried on the slow currents can summon a crowd from across a wide stretch of seafloor, each creature turning toward the promise of a meal and setting out across the dark, so that a patch of bare floor can become, within a day, a small bustling gathering, and then empty again once the feast is gone. The animals of the deep live in a world of whispers, and they have grown wonderfully good at listening. Where the surface shouts with light and colour, the deep murmurs, and its creatures have learned to hear every faint word, to live, attentive and unhurried, on the smallest of signals. Among the most delicate of all the deep's inhabitants are the gelatinous drifters, soft, transparent, jelly-bodied creatures that hang and pulse in the dark water like living glass. Some are simple and ancient, drifting on faint currents, their bodies so clear they are almost invisible, rimmed at times with shimmering bands of moving colour that ripple along their edges like tiny running rainbows. Others trail long, fine streamers far behind them through the dark, or pulse along by gently squeezing the water, whole creatures built of little more than living jelly and the will to keep going. They are among the most fragile-seeming things alive, and yet they thrive throughout the deep ocean, perfectly at ease in a place that would destroy almost anything rigid. Being made mostly of water themselves, they have nothing inside them for the pressure to crush, no air, no hollow, no brittle frame. And so the deep simply passes through them as though they were not there at all. A creature that is almost entirely water cannot be squeezed any smaller, for water itself barely yields to pressure. And so these soft, clear beings move through the most crushing depths, utterly unbothered, exactly as whole as they would be in the shallows. Softness, down there, is not weakness. It is the secret of survival. The creatures that endure the greatest pressure on Earth are very often the gentlest and most yielding, built not to resist the deep, but to flow with it, and so to remain unbroken where harder things would fail. There is a quiet lesson woven through all of this life, if you care to hold it as you drift towards sleep. The creatures of the trench do not survive by being hard, or fierce, or fast. They survive by softening, by letting the pressure pass through them, by slowing to the tempo of their world, by giving up what they do not need and yielding to what they cannot change. The most successful inhabitants of the harshest place on Earth are the ones that stopped resisting it, the ones that let it in and were not harmed. There may be no gentler teaching anywhere in nature, that sometimes the way to endure an immense weight is not to brace against it, but to grow soft enough to let it flow straight through, and rest. You might let your own body remember that, here in the dark, that you do not have to hold yourself rigid against the weight of the day, that you too can let it pass through you and be still. In the year 2009, much of this deep world was set gently aside and protected. A great stretch of the waters around the Mariana Trench was made into a marine monument, one of the largest protected areas of ocean anywhere on Earth. A vast expanse of sea, including the deepest point on the planet, left to remain as it has always been. No mining, no drilling, no disturbing of that ancient floor. The protected waters stretch across an area larger than many whole nations, a sweep of open ocean and hidden trench and undersea volcano set aside to stay wild forever. Within its bounds lie the molten sulfur pool, the springs of liquid carbon dioxide, the mud volcanoes and the deepest hollow of all, a single protected expanse holding more strange wonders than most countries above the water could ever claim. It is a quiet kind of reverence, this decision to simply leave a place alone, to let the deepest, stillest water on Earth go on being deep and still and undisturbed. Of all the things a busy world might do with its rarest places, it chose here to do almost nothing, and that nothing is a kind of gift, a promise that at least one corner of the planet will be left exactly as it has always been. No one knows how many kinds of creatures live down there, because most of them have never been seen. Every expedition into the trench seems to return with something new, a fish never filmed before, a creature never named, a form of life no one had imagined. Scientists who study the deep are quite certain that the great majority of its species remain entirely undiscovered, waiting in the dark to be met for the first time. A single net lowered into a hadal trench can come up holding creatures that have never been named, never been seen, never once been guessed at by anyone alive. The deepest seabed remains among the last places on the planet still full of genuine surprises, still holding secrets that no human has ever laid eyes on. Somewhere down there tonight, in the cold and the black, are living things that no one has ever known exist. Whole kinds of creatures going about their lives entirely outside of human knowing. There is something restful in that thought, that the planet still keeps mysteries this large, this close. In an age when so much of the world has been mapped and measured and photographed from every angle, the deep sea remains genuinely unknown, a true blank space on the map of the Earth. It asks for nothing and reveals itself only slowly in glimpses to the few who go looking. There is a freedom in that, a sense that not everything has been used up or pinned down, that wonder has not run out, that the Earth is still keeping a few of its largest secrets for whoever comes after. The not knowing is not a failure. It is a kind of grace, a reminder that the world is still wider and stranger than anyone can hold. You can fall asleep tonight in a world that still has unexplored depths in it, and there is a quiet comfort in knowing the map is not yet finished, that mystery still has somewhere to live. Consider the sheer volume of water resting in that trench, the enormous, quiet bulk of it. The Mariana Trench holds a vast reservoir of the coldest, deepest water in the Pacific, kilometers of it stacked one layer upon another, each layer colder and stiller and heavier than the one above. It is a staggering quantity of water, and almost all of it simply sits there, barely moving, held in the dark by its own great weight. If you could somehow weigh the column of sea above a single small patch of the deepest floor, it would come to thousands upon thousands of tons, all of it resting evenly, all of it utterly calm. To imagine it is to imagine a stillness with real mass, not an empty void, but an immense, full, heavy quiet, kilometers deep, pressing gently down upon itself. The trench is brimful of silence, and that silence has weight, and the weight holds everything below it perfectly, motionlessly at rest. Nothing green grows down there, and nothing ever has. Plants need sunlight to live, and no sunlight reaches the deep, so the entire world of the trench gets by without a single leaf or blade or growing green thing. There are no forests on the deep floor, no meadows, no gardens of the kind the surface knows. Nothing roots itself and reaches upward toward a light, because there is no light to reach toward. And yet it teems with life all the same. Life that has found another way entirely to feed itself, without the sun that everything above depends upon. For almost everything you have ever seen growing, from the grass underfoot to the tallest tree, the sun is the first source of all its food. Down in the trench, that ancient rule simply does not hold. The deep proves that the green world of leaves and light, for all its glory, is not the only way to build a living place. Life can be founded on something else entirely, down in the dark, where the sun has never been. An entire living order that owes the daylight nothing at all. That other foundation is a kind of chemistry that drinks from the rock instead of the light. Around the deep vents and the cold seeps, certain microbes draw their energy not from sunlight, but from the minerals and gases rising out of the earth, building the base of a whole food web from the planet's own chemistry. Scientists call it chemosynthesis, the making of life from rock and water and the heat of the world, with no need for the sun at all. When this was first discovered around deep-sea vents, it overturned a belief almost as old as biology itself, that every food chain on Earth must begin with sunlight. Everything else around those vents, every worm and shellfish and grazing creature, ultimately feeds on those microbes, and so on the Earth itself. At some vents, great red-tipped tube worms grow in dense thickets, taller than a person, with no mouth and no gut at all. They simply house the chemical-feeding microbes within their own bodies and live on what those tiny partners make, a creature and its invisible garden grown into one. It is an entire living world powered from below by the slow warmth of the planet, in the complete absence of any light, proof that life can light its own fire from the bare chemistry of stone. The discovery of that sunless chemistry quietly widened the whole idea of where life might be possible. If living things can thrive on the chemistry of rock and water far down in the lightless deep, then perhaps life does not always need a sun, or a surface, or a sky. Scientists who search for life beyond the Earth now look with great interest at the icy moons of the outer planets, where dark oceans may hide beneath frozen shells, places not so very different, perhaps, from the floor of the Mariana Trench. On moons like Europa and Enceladus, hidden seas may roll in darkness beneath kilometers of ice, warmed from below by the rock, perhaps even threaded with vents like those in our own deep. The deepest dark on our own planet has become a kind of rehearsal for imagining life on other worlds. What lives at the bottom of our sea hints at what might be resting in the seas of distant moons, so that the trench is not only the bottom of our world, but a window onto the possibilities of others. Picture the moment a submersible's lights first switch on at the bottom of the trench, and what those beams truly mean. The light pouring from that small craft may be the first light of any kind to fall upon that exact patch of seafloor in the entire history of the world, the first illumination ever in a place that has known nothing but darkness since the day it formed. For a few minutes the soft floor is lit, every pale grain and small creature thrown into sudden gentle brightness, colours appearing that have perhaps never been seen there before, and then the craft moves on and the dark closes back in behind it, perhaps forever. To bring light to a place that has never once been lit is a strange and tender act, like striking a single match in a cathedral that has stood dark for 1 billion years. The creatures caught in that sudden glow have no way to understand it. Having never known light to exist, they simply continue on their way, unbothered, as the brightness passes over them like a brief unexplained dawn and is gone. Most of the deep has never seen, and never will see, a single ray of anything at all, and goes on, untroubled, in a darkness it has never once thought of as missing the light. And when that light moves on, the darkness that returns is the oldest condition there is. The dark of the deep trench is not an absence waiting to be filled. It is the natural and original state of nearly all the living space on this planet, the way most of the world has always been. The brief flare of a passing light is the strange exception. The dark, the deep rule. We who live in the sunlit, thin upper layer tend to think of darkness as the unusual thing, the absence, the part that needs explaining. But across the whole of the planet, it is the light that is rare, and the dark that is ordinary and at home. If you could somehow take in all the living space on Earth at once, the lit and the unlit together, the bright sunny part would be only a thin glowing skin around a vast dark body, and the darkness would seem not frightening at all, but simply the way the world mostly is. There is something steadying in remembering that darkness is not emptiness or danger, but simply the quiet, ancient ground of most of the world, the condition in which the vast majority of life has always lived. The dark you rest in tonight is the same gentle dark that holds the whole deep sea, and it has held it, kindly, since the beginning. Above the trench, the surface of the sea goes on with its restless bright life, never guessing what lies beneath. Ships cross it, sunlight glances off the waves, weather comes and goes, and far, far below, sealed off by kilometers of water, the great calm of the deep holds perfectly still, entirely unbothered by any of it. The two worlds share the same patch of ocean, and yet could hardly be more different. One all motion and light and change, the other all stillness and dark and constancy. A fierce gale may lash the surface into mountains of foam, and yet a few kilometers straight down the water never stirs, never knows that anything has happened at all. The wildest storm that ever crossed that stretch of ocean spent all its fury in the topmost layer and reached no further. The deep beneath simply held still through the whole of it, as it holds still through everything, indifferent and unharmed. There is something steadying in that, in knowing that beneath all the world's turmoil there lies a place so deep that no storm has ever touched it, a vast calm foundation under everything, holding its peace no matter what passes overhead. And the deep one is by far the larger, the older, and the more enduring. Beneath every storm that has ever crossed that sea, the bottom has stayed quiet. Beneath every bright and busy day, the dark has kept its peace, a calm so far below the weather that no weather has ever reached it. The trench takes its name from the islands that curve alongside it, the Mariana Islands, a long arc of green peaks rising from the same restless edge of the earth that made the deep. Those islands are, in a sense, the trench's bright twin, born of the very same meeting of plates, the same slow grinding of the planet's crust, one reaching up into the sunlight while the other plunges down into the dark. Where the old seafloor sinks, it melts far below, and some of that melted rock rises again to build the volcanoes whose tips became the islands, green and warm and full of birdsong. On those sunny shores people live ordinary lives, fishing, raising families, watching the same sunsets anyone watches, entirely unaware, much of the time, that the deepest place on the whole planet lies just offshore, beneath the blue. A child building sandcastles on one of those beaches plays within sight of waters that lead, by an unbroken slope, down to the lowest point on Earth. The highest green peaks and the deepest black hollow are children of the same process, lifted and lowered by the same unhurried hand. The bright world and the dark are more closely related than they seem. Sunlit island and lightless trench, grown from a single seam in the floor of the sea. The water resting in the deep moves through the whole ocean on a cycle almost too slow to imagine. The great overturning of the seas, the sinking of cold water near the poles, its long creep across the deep floor, its eventual slow rise elsewhere, takes something like 1,000 years to complete a single turn. A drop of water sinking into the deep today might not feel the sun again for 10 centuries, rising at last into the light in a world none of us will ever know. This great unhurried loop carries warmth and cold and the breath of life around the entire planet, and is one of the quiet engines that keeps the whole world's climate gentle and livable. The same slow circulation that fills the trench also carries dissolved breath down to the deep creatures and lifts nourishment back toward the light, so that this enormous turning is, in a sense, what allows the deep to be alive at all, a planet-sized act of patience on which countless small lives quietly depend. The deepest water in the Mariana Trench is part of that enormous circulation, a planet-wide breath so unhurried that a single inhalation spans the whole of recorded history. The ocean breathes, but it breathes across millennia, and the trench holds some of the oldest breath of all, water that has been wandering in the dark since long before the first sail was ever raised. On the seamounts and ridges near the trench, where the rock rises closer to the faint reach of nourishment, there grow gardens of a most unexpected kind. Deep-sea corals and sponges living slowly in the cold, dark water. These are not the bright reefs of the sunlit shallows, but pale, delicate, branching forms, gathering food from the passing currents, building their fragile structures grain by grain across the centuries. Some deep corals are thought to be among the oldest living things on the planet, their slender branches laid down so unhurriedly that a single colony may have been growing since long before the first cities rose, alive and quietly building through the entire span of written history. In the cold and the dark, life builds cathedrals just very gradually, raising spires of stone and living tissue over thousands of years, in waters where no one will ever come to admire them. Among those slow builders are the glass sponges, creatures that spin their own skeletons out of silica, weaving delicate scaffolds of natural glass in the freezing dark. The threads they spin are so fine and so clear that they can carry light along their length, much as a strand of optical fibre does, so that these animals quietly mastered, in the deep, a trick of glass that human engineers would not work out for hundreds of millions of years. They are some of the longest-lived animals known, certain of them thought to persist for thousands of years, standing quietly on the deep floor while the entire human world is built and rebuilt above them. Imagine a single living thing that was already old when the pyramids were new, still standing in the same cold water, filtering the same gentle fall of food, asking nothing of the passing ages, present, in its silent way, for the whole rise of everything we call history. The deep does not only preserve old patterns of life. In places, it preserves the very same individuals, holding them gently in the cold across spans of time that turn whole civilizations to dust, so that a single quiet creature may outlast 100 human generations without ever once leaving its place. It is worth resting, too, on just how few human beings have ever truly been there. More people have stood on the summit of Everest in a single crowded season than have reached the bottom of the Challenger Deep in all of history. Only a small handful of humans have ever descended to the deepest point on the planet, a number you could very nearly count on your fingers, against the many thousands who have climbed the highest peak or flown above the sky. Far more people have travelled into space than have ever reached that floor. The trench remains, by this measure, harder to visit than the heavens. Hundreds have orbited the planet and a dozen have walked upon the moon, while the number who have rested on the deepest seabed would scarcely fill a small room. A tiny company of travellers, set against the whole crowd of those who have left the Earth entirely. The bottom of the world remains one of the most exclusive places a person can go, not because anyone forbids it, but simply because it is so deep, so dark, and so far. It is among the least visited destinations on the entire Earth, a place almost everyone will only ever imagine, as you are imagining it now. For those very few who have gone, the return is its own slow ceremony. After the long hours at the bottom, the submersible must rise again through all those kilometres of darkening water, climbing back up through the midnight and the twilight toward the distant, growing glow of the surface. The ascent takes hours, just as the descent did. A gentle reversal, the pressure easing, the cold lifting, the first faint hint of blue returning at last to the windows after so long in the black. To rise like that, watching the darkness slowly give way to a deepening glow, the water bluing and brightening minute by minute must feel something like a long, quiet sunrise that takes the better part of a day. And then, finally, The craft breaks the surface into open air and daylight, back into the bright world it left behind, carrying its passenger up from the deepest place on Earth into the ordinary warmth of the sun, the long dark journey ending, as all of them do, in light. What those returning travellers describe, almost without exception, is not fear but a profound and lasting calm. They speak of the silence, the stillness, the strange peacefulness of the deep, of how the bottom of the world felt not menacing but serene, a place of perfect quiet utterly removed from every trouble of the surface. Some have said that the hardest part was not the dark or the pressure at all, but coming back, leaving behind a stillness so complete that the ordinary noise of the world seemed loud and harried by comparison. They carry the memory of that calm with them ever after, a still point at the bottom of everything that they once visited and can never quite forget, a reminder that such peace exists and goes on existing far below, in the dark, long after they have returned to the light. To sit at the very floor of the world, sealed in a tiny sphere in the dark, seems to leave people not shaken but soothed, touched by a stillness they struggle afterward to put into words. The deepest, most extreme place on Earth turns out to be, in the experience of those who reach it, one of the most peaceful. There is a quiet there that the surface simply cannot offer. That peace is something you can borrow tonight, without ever leaving your bed. You do not need a submersible or years of training to feel what those travellers felt. The great calm of the deep is available to the imagination at any moment, a stillness you can sink into simply by picturing it. Let the mind descend gently into that dark and quiet water. Let the surface and all its noise fall away above you. Down here there is nothing to do, nothing to fear, nothing that asks anything of you at all. Only the cold, even, holding dark, and the slow drift of a single pale flake of snow falling past you toward a floor you will never need to reach. The deep does not hurry, and it does not worry, and it has never once been in a rush. It has held its silence through every loud and frantic age of the world above, untouched and unbothered, keeping the same dark calm it has always kept. While nations rose and fell, while cities were built and wars were fought, and whole ways of life came and went on the surface, the deepest floor lay exactly as it lies tonight, unchanged through all of it, asking nothing and noticing nothing, simply being what it has always been. There is no deadline in that black water. There is no urgency in the trench. Everything down there moves at the pace of falling snow and drifting current and growing glass, which is to say almost no pace at all. A stillness so complete it begins to feel like rest itself. To hold that calm in the mind, even for a moment, is to let some of it seep into you, easing the edges of the day, loosening whatever you've been gripping without knowing it. Let the whole vast image gather now into a single quiet picture you can rest upon. A long dark crescent at the bottom of the Western Pacific, kilometres beneath the waves. Cold, even water, pressing gently and equally from every side. A soft pale floor, deep with the snow of ages, dotted here and there with the faint slow lives that call it home. No light, no sound, no hurry. Only an enormous, ancient holding calm, the deepest and stillest place on the entire planet, going on exactly as it always has, whether or not anyone is there to see. That calm is real. It exists right now, tonight, far beneath the sea, and some small echo of it is here with you, in this room, in this dark, in the slow and easy rhythm of your breath. There is a strange and lovely intimacy to the deep, despite its vast remoteness. It is, after all, part of the same single ocean that touches every shore on Earth, the same body of water that laps at every beach, fills every harbour, and rolls against every coast connects in the end to the deepest hollow in the Mariana Trench. The water at your nearest shoreline and the water in that deepest hollow are not two different things but one continuous sea, joined without a break across the whole face of the planet. Pour a glass of seawater anywhere on Earth, and it is, in a sense, a small sample of the same vast body whose floor drops away into the Challenger deep. To stand at any edge of the ocean is to stand at the far rim of a single body of water whose deepest point plunges nearly 11 kilometers down. The deep is far away, and yet it is connected to every wave you have ever watched break. The gentlest ripple at your feet and the lowest hollow on the planet are part of one unbroken whole. The deepest creatures are linked to the surface in another way too, through the slow snow that feeds them. Every flake of that marine snow began as life in the sunlit waters far above, a tiny plant catching the light, a small animal grazing it, the whole bright machinery of the surface sea. When those lives end, their remains drift down, carrying the captured energy of sunlight all the way to the lightless floor. So even the deepest, darkest creatures are, in the end, fed by the sun, not directly, but through the long fall of the world above. A flake that began as sunlight caught by a tiny plant near the surface may feed a creature on the deepest floor a month or more later, the warmth of a single summer's day arriving in the dark long after that day has ended. The light of the surface reaches the bottom after all, transformed into a gentle snow, arriving weeks later as food in the dark. Nothing in the deep is truly cut off from the sun. It only receives it patiently and at a great remove, a kindness passed quietly down from the bright world to the dark. It is worth holding, as the journey nears its end, just how young our knowledge of all this really is. For almost the whole of human history, no one knew the deep sea held anything at all. Many believed it was an empty, lifeless void, too dark and too crushing for any living thing. Only within the last lifetime or two has the truth come clear, that the deep is full of life, full of motion, full of wonders no one had imagined. The very first humans reached the bottom only within living memory. The snailfish were filmed in their depths only in recent years. New creatures are still being named almost faster than they can be studied. The picture of the trench as a thriving, living, gently busy world is astonishingly new. Your grandparents were born into a world that did not yet know what lay at the deepest edge of the ocean. The deep has been there forever, but humanity has only just begun to meet it, and almost everything still waits to be discovered. And what humanity has found again and again is the opposite of what it feared. Where people expected a dead and barren waste, they found life. Where they expected violence, they found stillness. Where they expected a crushing, hostile void, they found a calm and even and ancient peace, holding its quiet at the bottom of the world. This, perhaps, is the deepest lesson the trench has to teach, that the places we most fear from a distance are so often, up close, far gentler than our fears, and that knowing a thing more truly tends to soften the dread it once held. Every fear the deep once inspired has eased, on closer acquaintance, into something more like awe, a deep respect for a place so vast, so old, so gentle in its enormous constancy. The bottom of the ocean turned out not to be a nightmare at all. It turned out to be one of the most serene places anyone has ever found, and the more it is known, the less there is to fear. Here then is the final wonder, the one to carry down with you into sleep. The deepest place on the entire planet, the coldest, the darkest, the most crushing, the most remote, is also one of its most peaceful. It is a place of perfect silence and perfect stillness, of even pressure and unchanging cold, where soft pale creatures drift in no hurry through water that has rested undisturbed for ages, and a gentle snow falls forever through the dark. Everything you might have imagined as harsh about it turns out, seen truly, to be calm. The greatest weight on earth presses without violence. The deepest darkness holds without menace. The most extreme place on the planet is, in the end, a place of rest. And that may be the quiet gift the trench offers across all those kilometres of black water. It asks for nothing. It holds no danger for you tonight, no urgency, no task. It simply exists far below, dark and cold and still and full of slow, gentle life, exactly as it has for longer than there have been minds to wonder at it. And it will go on existing, unchanged and untroubled, long after this night and this day and this whole age have passed. There is a deep steadiness in that. The bottom of the world is in no danger, and neither are you. The deep is at peace, and it invites you, gently, to be at peace as well, to let the great calm of the lowest, stillest place on earth become, for a little while, the calm in this room and in your breath and in your slowly quieting mind. The work of wondering is finished now. There is nothing more to gather, nothing more to understand, nothing the night still asks of you. Let the numbers go, the kilometers, the years, the names of the deeps and the ships and the people who went down into them. Let them all sink softly out of mind the way a flake of snow sinks out of sight into the dark water, going down and down until it is gone. Whatever stayed with you tonight is more than enough. Whatever slipped away was never yours to keep. If you are still here, drifting at the soft edge of sleep, another quiet journey is already waiting for you on the screen, ready whenever you want it, or never at all. There is nothing you need to reach for now. There is nothing you need to do. You do not have to remember the depth, or the cold, or the names of any of the creatures in the dark. Let them settle to the floor of the mind and rest there, the way the snow settles on the deep seabed, soft and slow and undisturbed. The deep is calm and dark and still. So is this room. So is the slow rise and fall of your breath, easing now, growing longer and softer, like the long, slow breathing of the sea. There is nothing left to do. There is nowhere left to be. The water is dark. The water is still. The deep is holding everything gently far below. Let your thoughts settle one by one, like pale snow drifting down through quiet water, coming to rest on a floor that has waited calm and dark since the beginning of the world. Rest now, and now 101 wonders are resting with you. Sleep now. Good night.